Ron Pramschafer, and welcome to Publishing Basics Radio, where weekly we help you navigate the self-publishing minefield. Publishing Basics Radio is sponsored by self-publishing.com, the Internet's only self-publishing superstore. Think you're ready to publish a book? Try self-publishing.com. Now on with the program. Today we're talking to Kristin Godsey, editor of Writer's Digest magazine. Kristin, editor of Writer's Digest. That sounds like a pretty neat job. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are right now.
I've been working in magazines for about 15 years now. I've been at a lot of different places. I have a master's degree in magazine journalism from Northwestern. I worked in New York. I was a reporter for Fortune. I worked for a magazine called Success. I worked for Good Housekeeping as an editor. I worked on the .com side for a site called Club Mom. And then I ended up back in Cincinnati, where I was an editor at the Artist magazine. And for about 2.5 years now, I've been editor of Writer's Digest.
It may sound like kind of a dumb question, but you're a writer yourself?
Oh, sure. Nonfiction is my focus, and I've tried my hand at some fiction, and I've got the outline in a drawer somewhere from my Great American Novel, but most of the writing I do is journalism.
I mean, Writer's Digest has been around forever, right?
Oh yeah, it's this is our 86th year.
What kind of circulation does it have?
We're about 120,000.
That's pretty good because it's funny. The fact that keeps being bannered around is that there's like 195,000 new titles published every year, or last year. I'm just curious, how many of the authors for these titles do you think subscribe to Writer's Digest?
Oh, I don't know. All of them. How about that?
Yeah, no, everybody I talk to. I mean, Writer's Digest is like the writer's magazine. The subscription rate's like, it's low enough that, there's nobody that won't subscribe because it's too expensive.
Right.
And I've noticed now, editorially, now I don't know whether it's always been this way, editorially, it really seems to emphasize writing and guiding writers towards traditional publishing.
That's true. That's correct. Because that is still by far the main goal of the people that we're speaking to. That's what they want.
Out of these 195,000 titles that we're just talking about, some other ridiculous amount, like 150,000 of them, are like people that have self-published in some form or another.
Right. It's a pretty high percentage.
So all these people that aspire to be published writers actually end up published through some other means other than, than a traditional publisher.
It's very hard to get traditionally published, so.
Because I looked over, just the last year, December had, the wrap-up of, all the different articles that you did. There seem to be very few articles on self-publishing, yet it's funny, it seems like over half your advertising are people that are looking to publish books for people.
Right. Well, that's true. I mean, a large percentage of our audience are beginning writers, and that's really the target market for a lot of these POD companies. So, we're a good vehicle for them to reach those types of writers. Now,
you've been around the block a couple times. If I say the word vanity publishing, what's that mean to you?
Well, that means to me that you're not getting edited, that you're doing it yourself. There is a stigma attached to that. There's no question about that. And some people think it's an outright fraud. So it's difficult. Self-publishing is something that's become a lot cheaper, which is why you're seeing this kind of proliferation and why there are so many books out there that are self-published. But there is still a stigma attached to it, although, that's lessening somewhat.
Chloe, I had a copy of Writer's Digest from, probably 10 years ago that I was looking at the other day. And the advertisers from 10 years ago and the advertisers today, it's funny, there's one company in particular, Vanity Press, who's probably been an advertiser for all 89 years you've been around.
Maybe.
They're a traditional vanity publisher. Everybody knows it. They know it. They say they
Right. They're very upfront about what they do.
And yet today you pick up the magazine, and you still see a Vantage ad. Okay, there it is. They got their third of a page. But yet you've got all these ads from these other publishers.
Right.
Places like iUniverse and Outskirts and Infinity and all, as well as Vantage. Do you see a particular difference between them? You say there is a difference, and this is kind of what we're all wrestling with in 2006 now anyhow. What do you see as the difference between them?
Well, everything's changing so much, and I wouldn't say that I'm completely up to speed on every aspect of it, but I know that print on demand is the center of all of this, and it's the way by which, it's the technology by which these books are printed. So when you talk about a typical subsidy publisher, which is what Vanity Press is, I think what they're generally doing is they're doing offset printing. So you have to buy a certain number of books from them. The reason why it's so difficult is that it's very expensive. It's much more expensive than POD route, and a lot of times people will end up with just boxes and boxes of books that sit in their garage unsold. With the POD model, it's less expensive. They're using the print-on-demand technology so that if you want one book, they can print you one book. So it's a matter of expense, really.
But you're still paying to be published.
That's right.
I get really, mixed feelings with, somehow, I know the old Vanity Press, I used to deal with people that would take second mortgages to, get their book published.
Right.
So I have a hard time sometimes figuring out what the difference is between charging hundreds of people thousands of dollars or thousands of people hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
If it's all pretty much the same end.
That's why this technology has advanced so much that just so many more people are able to do it. And when you get that many people, that's a nice business to be in, I'd say.
This is what brings us to an article that you wrote in all the February issues of Writer's Digest.
Mm-hmm.
The article was titled Setting a Standard, where you pretty much address not the Vanity Press, traditional Vanity Press,
right,
but these new print-on-demand publishers, that say they all say the same thing, that they're something different. They're not a Vanity Press, they are whatever it is that they say they are.
Yeah.
Now, tell us a little bit about the background, what went into doing this article.
Well, I was invited to an event that Tom Gregory of Infinity Publishing, which is a POD publisher, launched this past fall. It was called Book Summit, and the idea of it was to get people together in the industry, in the self-publishing industry, to have a little roundtable discussion about all the issues facing their industry. And I was invited to that as an observer, and you, Ron, were on the panel and had a lot of interesting things to say. But when when you introduced this idea of whether or not POD companies or self-publishing in general need some sort of code of ethics to monitor what they're doing, because the problem with these companies, there are companies that have cropped up who really are just flat out taking advantage of people and making promises that there's no way they can keep about the success of their books and what they can do for them. And that's where a lot of the stigma comes in. So this idea of a code of ethics was really interesting to me because I see it. I hear the comments about what this kind of publishing is. There are some pretty well-known bad examples of people of companies that actually are just flat out ripping people off. So it was interesting to me to kind of follow up with the principals involved in this book summit to talk to them about this idea and what they thought of it and where they thought it should go.
Yeah, because the whole thing seemed like sort of a no-brainer to me. It's like pretty much any industry sector has sets of rules that they adhere to.
Mm-hmm.
It's like even Writer's Digest. Now, you've got an audited circulation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you've subscribed to a certain set of rules that basically say your circulation is what it is, so you can sell advertising.
Right.
Right? You've got a set of rules for you probably use second-class mail.
Mm-hmm.
Post office has a set of rules.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, you don't make up your own rules, you go by the post office rules. It's not a big deal, but that's what it is. And so the magazine industry is pretty much driven by, not necessarily the small magazines, but the larger magazines are driven by that, right? I'm in the printing industry. We've got trade customs that go back 1 million years.
Uh-huh.
We all kind of just adhere to them. So when you got into this, did the results that you get surprise you at all?
I wasn't really surprised. It was interesting. People had fairly different perspectives on it. Some were more open to the idea than others. I think part of the difficulty comes from the idea of what print-on-demand is. And the people that I talk to all sort of object to that terminology, that it's just a technology and that it's just a way of printing books. And so how can you actually create a code of ethics that's just referring to a technology? That there's not really anything that completely binds these companies together for which they could draw up a code of ethics. That they're all kind of...
Yeah, print-on-demand is a print technology.
And some suggested, Susan Driscoll, the CEO of iUniverse, suggested that she felt that this was a good idea, but that it should probably be something that applies to all methods of self-publishing and not just focus on the print-on-demand industry. But that opens up a whole other... there are just so many different factors to it that I can see the objections, thinking that it would just be too difficult to come up with useful guidelines.
But what Susan said, it made sense. As long as you do it with a neutral party. Like I probably wouldn't be a good neutral party because I'm, fairly opinionated. Writer's Digest probably wouldn't be because you take advertising.
Yeah.
So even though you could say you're neutral, maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like there could be neutral parties around. As far as the print-on-demand, it's really a type of publishing, I think, that we're talking about. If in fact they're different. If they're just the Vanity Presses, and there's still plenty of them around, it really is the Wild West. I forget who used that in the article.
Yeah, Penny Sansevieri said that. What's so difficult is just what it comes down to is the perception of what you actually get if you self-publish your book. If you have the expectation that it's going to allow you to compete head-to-head with traditionally published books, you're kidding yourself. And that's what it comes down to, and that's where people are objecting, and that's where the stigma comes from. people feel that some of these companies are misleading in the promises that they're making.
That's always been my gripe.
Yeah.
And they all do it to a certain extent. Some of them are, like I say, or I don't see how they stay out of jail. Other ones, you could call it marketing. But there's enough left out. It's not necessarily what they say, but it's what they don't say.
Right.
And with as many subscribers and all as you have, do you find you get a lot of letters about this, or?
Honestly, I don't get that many from people who say that who write to me to tell me that they've worked with a particular company and they were completely misled. I really don't see a lot of those. I do get them sometimes. It's difficult for us. What we try to do, the advertising that we accept in the magazine is vetted in terms of whether or not the claims they're making in the ad they can actually stand behind. We just want to make sure that they're not making outright claims that just are false. And like you said, it's difficult drawing that line. With the Wild West situation, everything's changing so much and so fast, and people are coming up with different models that, can they now call themselves traditional publishers, or can they not?
Or the real, I've heard, farm system for traditional publishing. Our universe is one example. I think they really are trying. At least they've got people with publishing background. You look at the executives of half of these places, they don't even have any publishing experience.
Yeah.
They're like Kinko's with a name of publisher or whatever in front of them.
Right.
And they're really just selling services, and there's no end in sight. It just keeps selling new people. And I was a little surprised. Well, I wasn't surprised by some of the comments where they just wanted to make up their own rules. The Vanity surprised me a little bit because they've got this huge ad in your magazine every month where they basically point out the wrong things about other publishers and what's good about them, and they just wanted to pledge a service. But did you find it strange that pretty much all of the non-POD publishers thought it was a good idea?
I didn't find it strange. That makes sense. I wasn't exactly surprised by that. What I was a little surprised of was that there seemed to be a reluctance at the summit to recognize that there even is a stigma with this kind of publishing with some of the people. I think that these companies have to be aware of that and have to be doing what they can to be honest and straightforward about what they do and what they really can promise. The thing that I try to stress the most, what we try to stress the most in the magazine when we write for people who might be considering this kind of publishing is, first of all, think about the type of book you're doing. What are your goals? If your goal is to sell 1 million copies and get on Oprah, this is not the route to go. If you're writing a family history or a cookbook or a book of poetry or maybe a nonfiction book, like a reference book that has a very narrow audience and you're perhaps trying to build a platform, these are all viable and legitimate avenues that self-publishing might be a good route for you. But it's not for, it's very difficult for fiction, extremely difficult for fiction for a novel. And there are success stories, but that leads to my second point. If you are going to self-publish, you've got to be prepared to work yourself to death in terms of marketing and being out there and being the one to really sell the book.
We've been using the word self-publishing, but traditional self-publishing is where you sell for the publisher.
Right.
Just the root of the word.
Right.
It says you're the publisher.
Right.
Okay, and there's a difference between being a published author and being a self-publisher. I teach a little course, where the first line of the course is writing's a love, publishing's a business.
That's right.
Okay, and if you're going to be a self-publisher, you're entering the publishing business, which is not necessarily the case if you're just sending in money and, you're coming up with a few books. Or even better, Lulu's free. Lulu's free as long as you don't order any books.
Yeah. Well, they're trying to be the middleman. They're trying to, establish a middle ground there. But the fact is that if you think that going through a POD publisher is going to get you all the marketing background and all the editing help and all the high quality graphics and everything that you're expecting, you're going to be disappointed.
So, it was a very good article. I say, hopefully everyone will read it. I'm just curious how many letters of the editor you think you'll get from this article. I
have no idea. I'm really curious to see. The magazine has just hit newsstands this week. I think subscribers have had it for a little while, but I'll be interested to see what kind of feedback we get. People are very passionate about this subject, which is why this idea of a code of ethics is so intriguing. People are really passionate for and against, so I'll be curious to see. So what do you think is the next step? You know what, we actually have something, we did something in our newsletter this week, our email newsletter, kind of asking people to comment on this idea of a code of ethics, and do that on the site, in our forum. So I'll be interested to see what kind of comments we get there. I'll be looking through those and trying to see if there's something we might do with those. I didn't really feel after the summit that there was going to be any great rush from these companies to band together and establish anything. It's going to come from the consumer level. It may have to. If you push, just like the Underwriters Laboratory,
once the consumer pushes, are you a member of so-and-so, or you,
right.
Then they'll do it. I mean, they're not going to do it on their own. So you'll come back after all, you get all these responses back in and everything, and you come back on the show?
Sure.
Tell us how you made out?
Sure.
Well, thanks a lot for visiting with me today.
You're welcome.
Okay, and I'll hopefully talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Ron.
Take care. For Publishing Basics Radio and selfpublishing.com, this is Ron Pramshafer. See you next week.